Hello everyone and welcome to this Speeki webinar series. My name is Scott Lane and I am going to be the leader of today's webinar. For those of you that have joined Speeki webinars before, welcome back. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we welcome you to the Speeki webinar series. By way of background, the webinar series are a 30-minute webinar. So they are meant to be a very quick overview of a specific topic. And then to the extent that we need to dig deeper in those topics, we typically have that covered in our Speeki Academy program. So the webinars are meant to be a quick overview of a topic. We give you as much detail as we can within that 30-minute period. There might be sometimes questions. Typically, however, there are not, but ask questions in the chat section and I'll get back to you offline if we can't do it within the 30-minute period. So please feel free to give some feedback or ask questions and we'll get back to you. Today's topic is focused on AI and how it's revolutionizing ESG and sustainability. Well, firstly, AI is revolutionizing everything in the world at the moment, so it's no surprise that there is some revolutions taking place in this space of ESG and sustainability. Today's webinar will walk through two aspects. The first is we will look at it from a perspective of AI in general. And so we'll talk about some of the best practices that we're seeing around the world. And then we will talk more specifically about how that has impacted Speeki and some of the things that we are doing on the Speeki side. So it's no doubt that you will find some of the material to be interesting, specifically for your day job, and you will find some of that material more interesting for the dialogue that we're most likely having over dinner tables and discussions with friends and colleagues about what's happening to our planet. So firstly, as I mentioned, we're going to walk through two areas. Now, the first, again, is focused on things that are happening in the world where AI is helping ESG and sustainability. Now, in putting this part of the course together, I did a lot of research around what AI initiatives are being driven around the world. Now, when you look at that topic, you'll find hundreds or even thousands of use cases where AI is being used in this space. It is very interesting. There is a lot of really interesting activity happening. Now, the reason that I'm going to walk through some of these topics is firstly because some of them are quite interesting as a general knowledge. But secondly, I think as a practitioner in this ESG and sustainability space, we all need to be able to have dialogue with members of the public or friends, family, journalists, colleagues about what's happening in the world and what are some of the good and positive developments are when it comes to ESG and sustainability. So I like to do this research and I like to read things on this area to increase my skills about how the planet is, in fact, getting slowly improved by the result of some of our efforts, and in particular, how AI is helping that. And again, the second part is talking more specifically about Speeki, to tell you about some of the things that we're doing on our side. So let's get started with the first part of the course, which relates more to the general initiatives around AI. Now, I picked firstly the issue of waste. Waste is something that we're all very familiar with, and it's something that we're familiar, whether it's office waste or municipal waste from our homes, or whether it's industrial chemical waste. Firstly, AI is being heavily invested in these areas. Now, I've listed on the screen some of the places where AI is being used. And we've seen it in significantly being used in the sorting areas, where waste is now being sorted according to AI technology. So we've seen some of these situations where AI machinery can identify whether something is a plastic or it's wood or it is some form of other substance, a metal, which is being disposed of. So again, the whole processing waste management side is pretty clever. We've also seen AI being used in the collection of the Internet of Things and bins collection. So there are now smart bins, and bins are now identifying different types of waste in that bin, and when it's collected, how it can be sorted and removed. We've also seen AI being used in contamination. So as you could see on the screen, there is a large pile of material, some of that may be contaminated waste. So there's now a bunch of AI machinery which will identify that contaminated waste and can automatically separate it. There are drones, which are AI drones, which are now flying over waste landfill sites in order to identify areas that may be contaminated, or where there might be areas where there is methane leaks, for example. So there's a number of very clever activities being used in this waste space. We're also seeing it used in electric vehicles. So we're now seeing AI-driven electric vehicles to do waste collection in a couple of countries, in particular in Europe. And we're also seeing a whole bunch of technologies around monitoring landfills, environmental monitoring of potentially emissions that are coming from landfills. So in the waste area, there is quite a lot of really interesting activity. The most impressive, I think, from what I've seen, is in waste sorting and also in the landfill management. So really interesting areas on waste. From a water perspective, one of the most important elements of the E in ESG, we're seeing, again, AI used. And the most interesting area here is probably in predicting repairs. So most of us are aware that water is a scarce resource, and a lot of it is being in underground pipes, which have been in place for, in some cases, since Victorian eras or hundreds of years. So predicting water leakage and where those repairs need to take place, infrastructure failures, and is really an interesting place where AI is now being used. In particular, they're starting to look at ways in which they can predict where issues may fail, where infrastructure may break, where leaks may occur, and getting ahead of it. Now, of course, that is not rocket science, but it certainly is more effective than waiting for a puddle to appear on a road and identify that there may be a sinkhole underneath it. So AI is now starting to get a little bit smarter on this element. The second area where it's making some great inroads is around the optimization of networks of water. So obviously there is a large movement of water from places across countries to other places in countries. And some of these are canals or open lakes or rivers or reservoirs, and some of them are underground tanks and facilities. A lot of management of water is getting a lot more efficient. So it's getting water into the right places at the right times with the right variable needs of society. Again, flood predictions are also useful. We're seeing a lot more activity around AI, both in flood and in fire predictions. And we've seen some of that used in some of the recent flooding that we've seen in some countries. So using a lot of the AI technology to both utilize water where it is, where it needs to be, identifying detection, leaks, but also looking at flooding, but more importantly, irrigation systems. And we're seeing how smart irrigation systems can now reduce water and make sure that we use it in the right places. So again, some really interesting uses of AI in water technology and water management. On each of these slides, you'll see a QR code. What I've done is there are a number of articles that relate to each page, but I've included a QR code of just one in the relevant places so that you can read up on it and you can see some topics if you want to follow up. The third area, which was really interesting about how AI is being used, is in relation to bees. Bees obviously play an essential part of our agricultural system, or in fact our system of life. And so understanding how AI can monitor bees, monitor platforms that are beekeeping, computer vision, robotics around bees, designed to improve bee health and also increase pollination rates. So the whole bee activity, which we all know is so important to our life and our sustainability, is now being taken over by AI. So a really interesting study, which I've included the references to here. Moving from the E to the S side, modern day slavery. Now, there is a number of initiatives being run by organizations, mostly NGOs around the world, that look at modern day slavery. Most of it is in identifying potential modern day slavery victims. So we've seen some analysis in the airline industry and the transportation sector where they're trying to prevent or trying to identify where victims of modern day slavery might be happening. And this is associated with human trafficking. So doing these matching algorithms and looking for both facial technology, image technology, and also identifying the patterns that human traffickers may take when it comes to moving humans around the world in terms of slavery. So early days in this area, there's been lots of setbacks in relation to privacy concerns, but it's definitely an area which I think is really well focused on. The next area, the S in ESG again, looks at supply chains, and we've seen a lot of activity in supply chains. I'm going to cover some of that in the Speeki section in the second half of this presentation to show you how AI is being used in supply chains. Now, the most place where it's being used is mapping out supply chains and identifying risk in supply chain, but there's now a lot of technology that's being used in order to identify particular supply chains that may be high risk for example, environmental issues. I was looking at something during the week, which is an aerial topography view, so a satellite image of an area of land, and based on that, an AI engine can tell us what sort of land it is, what the land use is, or whether it's got surrounding areas that may be subject to environmental issues, or whether in fact there have been environmental claims on the land, also looking at whether or not it's closely associated with forests or natural forests or habitats or particular animals, etc. So using AI to kind of do an overlay across that land use to try and identify the environmental sustainability. So again, doing that through the supply chain so that you can actually get some greater scale. So very interesting models when it comes to supply chain issues. Not surprisingly, AI is used very heavily in the cyber risk category, which we put into the S in ESG. Of course, many of you know that cyber risks are not necessarily seen as a common S issue and are not something that's reported under, for example, CSRD, but it is an issue that it impacts most companies and it will also impact people. So in our view, it is a people issue and it's a sustainability issue, but again, often not seen by regulators as such. A lot of AI used in that, so detecting phishing, detecting anomalies, looking at vulnerable systems, identifying particular threats, etc. So AI in this area, as you would expect, is pretty significant. It's a really significant piece of cyber risk management. Another example we've seen in icebergs. So looking at the role of icebergs and the ice shelves that are reducing in size, AI is able to assess the size and complexity of those ice shelves, to look at the depth of them, look at how they are reducing or how they're breaking off. And they can do that 10,000 times faster than what we previously did, which is a result of some satellite technologies and boats going out and actually measuring things. So again, very simple, pretty obvious stuff, but a really interesting approach as to how we can use AI to kind of speed up the research and development of some of these key topics. So that brings us to the end of stage one, where we're looking at some of the interesting ways that AI has been used. If you are interested on these topics, there is a lot of material out there and there is a lot of activities going on when it comes to AI. Some of the material I provided you with the QR codes can give you a head start in some of those areas, but there is a huge amount of material out there and a huge amount of activity. So almost every element of the ESG has got some clear AI advantages, which are really interesting technologies and things that I think will shift the needle of compliance and also improvement of metrics over time. So that brings us to the end of the first phase. So let's now look at what we are doing on the Speeki side and to try and make this a little bit more relevant to those of you that are in the practitioner area looking at ESG and sustainability. How can you use some of the AI technologies as part of your work? Now, I'm going to walk through some of the ways in which we have done that in Speeki and some of the initiatives that we've taken. Again, not to be a sales pitch, but it's the only way that I can really explain some of the initiatives that we're doing is by showing them to you. So firstly, at the outset, we see that AI is indeed transformative when it comes to managing these risks of ESG and sustainability, particularly when it comes to sustainability reporting. We think that it's transformative. We've seen that it's transformative. We've proved that it's transformative. And we think there's some really significant steps that we've taken and that companies can take when it comes to AI. Now, naturally, there are some AI challenges and there's some AI governance issues which should not be ignored. But generally speaking, if you can get through that, the use of AI in this area is not going to be one of those highly restricted areas from a governance perspective. And so generally speaking, it's relatively straightforward when it comes to ESG and sustainability. So on the Speeki side, we use it in lots of ways. And I'm going to go through some examples and walk you through some screenshots of some of the things that we do. While I'd love to show it in person and love to show some of the things that can happen, I couldn't do it in a 30-minute period or indeed 15 minutes. So as a result, I've done some screenshots. But to walk you through some of the areas that we've focused on. Some of these I will show you later. So firstly, we did a lot on the work in the whistleblowing area. So whistleblowing, part of the G in ESG, and a requirement of the reporting standards, in particular CSR D, in particular in the first governance standard. So whistleblowing is important. So we use a lot of technology there. We use a lot of chatbots, a lot of voice to text translation. We use expert dialogue. So when someone is reporting something, they're actually having a dialogue with an AI agent. So not surprising, that is relatively old technology, but the way in which the AI technology, we call the technology called Nicole. So if you hear me not call Nicole, that's our version of Siri or Alexa. So Nicole is the AI engine, or the name of that engine that we use. And so we've seen it in the whistleblower space. We've also seen it on the insights that we can draw from ESG programs. So when clients use the system and they are starting to build their ESG and sustainability programs, we have seen some of those areas where Nicole can start to give advice and start to advise companies on areas that they have missed, areas that they need to focus on. So again, starting to get that AI engines to start being a little bit more practical to identifying gaps. Another place we've invested a lot of time and effort is in the GHG calculation. So part of our system includes a greenhouse gas carbon accounting system. There is a lot of AI built into that. Now, a lot of material to go through there, but broadly speaking, AI is used in order to map certain types of expenses to certain types of carbon issues, so that you can identify sort of carbon management and sort of carbon accounting based on the type of spend, the type of trending, etc. Being able to read documents, extract information, and put it into the right categories is another place where we use AI. So a lot of AI is used in matching technology. So again, a fairly standard use of AI. Other areas that we've looked at is in supplier risk assessments. So if you remember, part of our role is to look at the value chain and to ensure that removing human rights and environmental issues from our value chain is one of the key elements of ESG programs. That requires knowing your supplier, knowing who they are, where they operate, what some of the risks are. So we're using a lot more AI now in order to identify what is the risk in a supplier based on who it is, where they're located, what they're doing, where they're sitting. So using some basic principles around types of risk, but also layering in some of the things that we talked about. So looking at where they're located, next to forests, using satellite technology or other technology to try and map out where they're located. So a lot of really interesting work can be done on that. Other areas where we're starting to really get some traction is we're all familiar with customers sending you questionnaires to fill out, 100 questions, 500 questions, asking you to tell you all about your ESG and sustainability programs or part of them. So we're doing a lot of work now in our platform to be able to respond to those questionnaires. So if a client of our platform gets a questionnaire, they dump the questionnaire into the system, Nicole, should be able to know the answers to those questions. Why? Because the data should be sitting in the platform. So Nicole knows how you're managing a particular issue. Nicole knows what the governance model of ESG is. Nicole knows what some of your carbon management initiatives might be. She can extract that information and pre-populate the report. So a lot of really interesting areas around how to respond to this questionnaire madness, which has hit the ESG world. Another area that we're focused on is XBRL reporting. So as we know from ESG and sustainability reporting, there is an obligation to produce a digital report. Now, a digital report is not a PDF. That's not classified as digital anymore. So that's traditional. The digital reporting is in formats that machines can read, or ideally, machines and humans can read. So formats like XBRL or otherwise inline XBRL, so iXBRL, so formats that enable humans to read. The production of that requires a lot of tagging of data so that you can see where the tags are and the computer can know what this information is when it reads it based on some sort of taxonomy. Those sorts of things are really great with AI. AI has done we've done a lot of work in order to do that matching and to create that XBRL formats and also to give machine readable sustainability reports. So a lot of efforts in that area. Some more examples that we've done in our AI systems I'm going to walk through now. Some of these are just visuals, so it's a little bit hard, but I'll try and walk through as best that I can to see how some of this works in practice. So I mentioned some of these before. Some of them will be new. Whistleblowing, having a dialogue when you report something. So again, we've had this chat dialogue for many years. Many of us are familiar with it in other circumstances, trying to change an airline ticket, rather unsuccessfully, often using a chatbot. But hopefully, when you use a chatbot in this sort of situation, because it's quite restrictive, you know exactly what's going to be happening and what's going to be reporting. So chatbots are a really good way to collect information from someone, to digest that information, put it into categories, and then put it into a system in order to follow up. So that inbound receiving of issues, whether it's a grievance issue that's required by some of the ESG and sustainability reporting requirements, or it's an issue in relation to your traditional whistleblower. So there's a lot of good stuff that can be done there. It also, of course, helps to do the analysis of whether something's important or not important, try and assess sentiment as well. So really interesting technologies in that space. Again, in the GHG space, a lot of technology is used to take data, take information, to strip it, find the relevant information from documents and extract it and put it into the right place, mapped against the right categories so that you can start to do emissions factor calculations. So not rocket science, but definitely some AI-enabled document retrieval work that's done. ESG reporting, I covered it before. There's a lot of ways to really use AI in this. If you've got the right data set and you've got that sitting in one place, for example, in our platform, then it's very easy for relatively easy for the AI engine to look across that data set to consolidate that information. So you're probably familiar with many of the ChatGPT type initiatives where you've asked questions and it's able to consolidate information. The difference here is that you're consolidating the information based on where it is in systems. So again, pulling that information together in the form of a report is one of the key things that AI can do for you. We used to do that by using tags and mapping tags, but frankly, AI does that in seconds as opposed to weeks and months of coding. Other ways that AI can get involved here is, again, customizing responses. So if there is a response to a questionnaire, you can map a response. And the other thing with AI, which is very good, is that you can start to look at accuracy. So in our system, we have a low, medium, and high model where we say, this is how accurate we think the AI engine is in giving this response. So the AI engine itself is trained to say, look, I think this is a low accuracy, a medium, or a very high accuracy of response. So that sentiment analysis and that testing of how good the material is, that's something that AI engines are very good at. So it allows us to know where we need to focus when we get some AI responses. So most of us are familiar with this is just coming through now in some of the AI engines where if you ask a question, you'll get an answer, but you don't know whether the answer is right or not, or you don't even know if the AI engine thinks that it's the right answer. With what we're doing and what is now just coming through is that the AI engines are starting to say, well, actually, I think this is pretty accurate, and here's why. And it gives you the sources. So again, just a professionalization of that AI response. We've seen this in the scoring as well. So again, when we give a score, we think that there's an accuracy score. So similar, so it's a two-phase scoring system. One is around accuracy of data, and one is around the completeness of the data. So slightly different in their analysis. So again, trying to add this reasoning to try and assess whether or not information is useful or not, and whether we can rely on it when AI consolidates it together. We touched on this before, the XBRL tagging. The auto tagging systems that we have, and I think other companies are working on as well, takes the information from your sustainability repository and tags it with the appropriate tags that are required by, for example, ESRS taxonomies. So these is in some sense simple, but really what the AI engine has to do is look at that request for that taxonomy, look at that particular tag, go and find that information and then tag it accordingly. Again, some kind of system to identify whether or not it's effective or not. We're going to be seeing a lot more of this going forward. So the tagging and the creation of XBRL, machine-readable reports, and iXBRL, the inline ones where humans can also see it, how that information is put together, frankly, if you're not using AI, it is going to be a disaster. We, thankfully, moved to AI pretty early, but otherwise you would be tagging every piece of data in the world that you've got, and you'd be trying to pull it all together. from a manual perspective, and that is just a tag management nightmare. So without AI, it's incredibly difficult. Again, we touched on this one before. It's a feature of our system, but what we're doing is responding to questionnaires. So when a questionnaire comes in, we know what the question is, and we know what, firstly, the answer is. We know what the answer is we gave last time. We know the answer that we said was the correct answer. And Nicole will go and find those answers in the platform from all the data that she has and try and provide trying to provide an answer that we think is accurate and has a completeness associated with it. So again, not rocket science, but it's AI is searching for those responses. So again, this sort of material, I think, just has to be used going forward. I mean, filling out questionnaires and giving answers on a one-off basis is just dumb. That can't be the future. So using AI to do some of these things is absolutely key. And this is a really interesting application which clients are really loving. Another place where we're looking for AI is, again, in that responsive questionnaires, is not just looking at common questions of a database, so a database of answers we've given before, but actually going out and looking for that data across other areas. So not just relying on answer libraries, but going into the actual data set. So going into your sustainability report, into the platform, and looking for answers. So again, using a little bit more knowledge of that AI systems. I mentioned before looking at risk assessments. Now, supplier risk assessments are, in my view, pretty hopeless. What happens at the moment is company sends out a questionnaire to a supplier completes a bunch of information, and frankly, most of the questions don't apply. Most of the questions don't make sense. Most of the questions are questions that you may already know the answers to, and frankly, very few people actually review the answers to see if they're actually in line with what you expected. So again, what we're doing in Speeki is we're saying, well, let's stop all that because that makes no sense. Let's get a bit smarter. Firstly, only send a questionnaire out if you know what you need to know. So the purpose of getting a questionnaire out is to collect information, but you should know what it is that you need to collect. So AI puts together the questionnaire for you automatically. So in our system, the AI engine will say, based on who you are, what you're doing, where you're based, locations, etc., what we know about you, we need these answers to these questions. We're not going to send you 100 questions. I'm just going to give you a questionnaire with 16 because I need 16 questions answered. And when those answers come back in, the AI engine looks at those questions and then makes a determination whether it meets the requirements or not. So getting a lot smarter. So again, we've been doing risk assessments, sending out questionnaires for a long time. What AI is supposed to be doing is making that whole process smoother, smarter, more custom, and more focused. Now, another way that we're really looking at AI and how to get that is insights. So when you're building your ESG and sustainability programs, you've got a lot of things to do, and you're trying to get tailored feedback, you're trying to get insights, you're trying to get direction, you're trying to find out what you should do, what your next steps are. We've added a lot of insight into the system. So the AI engine is saying, this is what we think you need to be doing. Make sure you consider these points. Make sure that you have these 4 or 5 answers in this particular response. So when you are filling out your profiles for sustainability reporting or you're building your programs, you're getting some guidance doing it. So again, really focused on how to do that. Of course, we've touched on this before, generating reports is a really clever way of doing it. So using AI to generate those reports is, again, significantly better. So whether it's an ESG report internally, externally, it's for a standard or whatever it is, huge value. Another area that we're using is ratings. So we have a product, Speeki Sustainability Score, which rates suppliers. Again, using the responses, assessing those responses, and knowing whether they're good or not. So that kind of walks through some of the things that we're doing on the AI front and how we've embedded into our platforms. Now, obviously, as we go through this AI experience and we all get more familiar with AI technologies and we get more familiar with embedding them into our business, what is very clear is a couple of things. Firstly, AI is not going away. Secondly, it is enormously powerful, which we all know. And thirdly, with the right governance model, it can be really useful to ESG and sustainability. So we've seen it in the big wide world, part 1 of this presentation, and now we've seen it in a more day-to-day operations environment when it comes to managing ESG and sustainability programs. So the future, I think, is we've just gotten started. Frankly, even in my team and what we're looking at, we've just scratched the surface. So there is a huge opportunity going forward to embed this across companies. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. Now, there was a lot of information in this 30-minute session. I haven't had some time to answer some of those questions, but I'll try and do so offline. One of the questions related to double materiality assessments, and can AI do that as well? And the answer is absolutely it can. It should be doing it. It should be involved in it. It should be giving its views. It should be doing all that. And it should be doing the same with stakeholder engagement as well. So stay tuned from the Speeki side on those two areas. It's something that we're working on pretty diligently. So come back to me in a few months and we'll see how that goes. Thank you very much for this listening to this edition of the Speeki webinar. Again, as usual, the recording and the slide will be made available to the participants. If you need any further information, feel free to reach out to me or one of my team, and I'm happy to walk through any of these issues personally or with the team in live sessions if you wish to see it. So thanks for listening, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Take care.